Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Doc Frank, and my guest today is Carina O'Brien from Melbourne in Australia. Carina is not only the head of strategy of a large multinational railway system supplier, but she has also initiated the Working Mumma project, which includes a podcast with actually more episodes than my own and various other resources to support working parents balancing their family life with thriving careers. Expect to learn important insights on how to balance career, family, and passion projects, where to find support as a working parent, how diversity between genders can help tackling the resource shortage in the railway industry, ways for attracting young women to railways, the importance of workforce flexibility, trends facing the Australian railway industry, the Australian Interoperability Challenge, and much more. You can support this show and make me very happy by subscribing and sharing it with friends and co-workers. You may also find great value in checking out the arguably world-leading platform for online training on digital signaling systems, which is docfranktraining.podia.com. Please enjoy today's episode. Hi, this is Doc Frank again. I need to tell you about my brand new online ETCS training. It's the online version of the well-proven ETCS Kickstarter live training that has helped more than 200 railway professionals in Australia and New Zealand, regardless of their prior knowledge of signaling. So that really means you can learn the fundamentals of the European train control system, even if you didn't have any signaling knowledge before the training. How good is that? There's an online study group for networking during the training, and I also provide an industry-leading support of questions and answers, not just during your training, but also for a guaranteed minimum of 12 months after the training. People who can register before the 31st of May get a very special early mover discount. So don't hesitate and sign up now at docfranktraining.podia.com/ETCS. That's docfranktraining.podia.com/ETCS. Carina, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Doc, for the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
I hope I can meet my own expectations here, because between the two of us, I'm probably more the junior podcaster. You're running your own podcast. You have a lot more episodes than I have at the moment. So I hope I will be doing okay. So once the recording is over, I will probably ask you how I did.
Look, I still consider myself a bit of a hack along the way. So look, podcasting's a fun medium. So let's have fun.
Yes. Okay. That's a good start. Let's have fun. You do have a very responsible role in the railway industry. You're head of strategy as one of the biggest global suppliers of railway technology, which is Siemens. So no reason to hide the names here. So by all means and by all purposes, you've got a very a meaningful career, a responsible career, but you also have a family life, and then you also have that thing that's in your background, which is the Working Mumma, let's call it project, which is a podcast in itself, which is called Working Mumma, but there's also more behind it. When I looked at all this, the first question that came into my mind, and I thought I'd just ask you that question for starters: how many hours does your day have? Because mine stops at 24.
Sadly, so does mine, and I wish there was more hours in the day, but unfortunately, there's not. It's look, I do Working Mumma after hours, so it's something that I'm very passionate about. But yeah, as you say, I've got a big role and meetings that can go into the night at times with headquarters. but I've got the opportunity that I can work in around that. But also I've got a very supportive family that allow me to maybe work on the computer whilst watching TV or, record podcasts of an evening and things like that. So I wish there were more hours in the day, but unfortunately there aren't.
Yeah. For those listeners who may not be aware of it, if you work for a global company in a responsible role, a global company with a headquarter overseas, you're basically working two shifts. You're working a day shift where you are in your office and you're talking to your colleagues locally and everything. And then you have the second shift when the overseas headquarter wakes up and when they want to talk to you. So you already mentioned that there are very often late night calls. And I worked for Siemens myself abroad, but it's not just the Siemens thing. I experienced exactly the same when I worked at Thales, and it was also exactly the same when working at GE, with the only difference that the time zone difference to North America was even worse than the time zone difference to Europe. And when you are at the East Coast, as you are in Melbourne, it's even worse because the time zone difference to everywhere else is even bigger. The only exception being New Zealand, but who has a headquarter in New Zealand? Nothing of the global companies. So probably a prudent thing to ask here is, how did you choose to create like a third onerous aspect of your life, apart from trying to build a family and sustain a family with your own children, and also having a responsible career in the rail industry? What made you create that third thing that's Working Mumma?
Wow, it's going back a little while now, but I've always been career orientated and always wanted to, have a good career. So I'd always, I've done an undergrad in IT. I've done my master's in strategic management. And so when I was about 6 months pregnant with my first son, I was looking around of how am I going to do this? How am I going to be a mum and have a career? And just like most things, that if you can't find it, you create it yourself. So, good market intelligence. I went out, created a survey, got these great responses from people, and they said, everyone was saying about how unsupported they feel as a working mum, particularly about returning back to work after maternity leave. So while I was on maternity leave the first time round, rather than just breastfeeding and changing diapers and getting to know my mother's group, I created this community and network for working mums that had a few events and the like. And then in 2020, before the pandemic hit, I was thinking, well, how can I then engage with more people? And so that's when the idea of a podcast came. I'd been on a podcast, to be honest, I actually hadn't really listened to many podcasts before that. And I really loved the medium of it. And so I then listened to podcasts, taught myself podcasting again, just while I was on maternity leave. And I thought, right, I'm just going to give this a go. And that's where it's really gone from there. So it's one of those things as well that I'm so passionate about supporting women, particularly say in a STEM space. As I said, I studied IT at university. I was one of 5 girls that I could count in a lecture theatre. So I've always had this passion and really wanting to support and really elevate up, minority groups, particularly women, in the workforce. And so if it hasn't been in STEM and now it's in the rail space, and also doing my bit to try and improve female workforce participation in a rail space and advocate as well for women in flexible work practices. So from there, it's turned into a bit of a membership, a program, but really an advocate for, working mums and also to an extent as well, working parents, because we all know with parenting, it takes 2 to tango to create a child. So then we also need both parents to support in a workplace as well. So that's probably a very shortened version of where it is. And look, I have to say, I love the medium of podcasting. I love what Working Mumma has done. And interestingly as well, what I've learnt through Working Mumma, I've also been able to translate into my corporate role as well. So there's been a lot of topics and even networking connections. And even I was able to speak at the Ausrail conference last year around diversity and also speaking with working parents. So it's been good that how both my worlds at times have also been able to intersect in a positive way.
Yeah. I mean, I did know when I invited you to be on the show that you did a podcast, but then I did a little bit more of research and quickly found a link to a website, which I will put in the show notes. It's got to do with Working Mumma as well. And then I realized that it's not just a podcast. It's also what looks like a membership thing and a blog and surveys and all kinds of stuff. Did you anticipate that it would become so much that Working Mumma would become, I'm not sure whether you just started with the podcast and everything else developed from that, or whether you developed the other thing first and then you did the podcast to basically attract more people to it. It seems to have grown over time. And how do you keep that manageable and not let it become too big and overwhelming that it eats away from your family time or eats away from your time at the company?
It all just started from a free Facebook group, and it's really just gone from there. And I think the podcast has really been probably the central part of it now. That's a bit of an octopus leg. Look, I think it's also about finding efficiencies, just like we do in a corporate space. We're also looking for efficiency. So now from a podcast, I use an AI tool that very quickly cuts out all the ums and ahs that I used to take literally hours to sometimes cut out. But now I can do it literally with a click of a button. So it's about efficiencies. My husband also knows that I'm pretty passionate about this topic. So as I said, we'll be watching a TV show on the couch, and there am I on the computer, maybe writing a newsletter or writing some content or something like that. So it's one of those things that I think when you're so passionate about something, it doesn't really feel like work. I will, to be honest, I have tried to go, look, no, I don't have time for this, and try and let it go. But the passion for it keeps coming back. There are times when I may not release a podcast for a couple of weeks and things, but it's one of those things that I do have to balance it in that regard. That, and particularly the last couple of months, I've been really busy. So podcast, as much as I've got my own expectations of what I'd like to do with Working Mumma, and I have to then peel them back to go, no, I've got my Siemens role first. That's where it is. And then also then Working Mumma is what's on the side. But for me, Working Mumma is also a bit of like how I fill my cup, and I feel it's also my creative outlet. So I also love to run. So that's my way of really filling my cup and getting like really clearing my mind. But also Working Mumma for me is like, okay, it's almost like my community service. How I've got this thing of I want to help people. And so this is my way of helping others. And when I get messages of people saying, I love that podcast episode, or it's helped me return back into work, it's helped me feel more comfortable, I'm going, okay, that's great. It is making a difference. Because with podcasting, you're talking one to many. You don't know actually who's going to be listening. The statistics, is that real? So you just hope. And I had a conversation with someone last week, and she said, I loved this episode and thank you so much. And it's quite humbling because I just created it hoping, I always had the aim that could I pay it forward to one other person. And I think that I've hopefully been able to help more than one person through this. And so that's what keeps me going, and being able to balance it to an extent so far. It's getting probably slightly harder, but I'm still pretty passionate about it. So I'll find a way, and it might just mean an extra cup of coffee a day.
Yeah. I'm just reading a very interesting book by Oliver Bergman, which is called 4,000 Weeks. It's a very recommendable book about almost like an antidote to time management. And one of the key statements is that you basically have to give up trying to do everything, or thinking to be able to do everything. And instead, it's really a matter of prioritization. Yeah. What am I going to do now or within the next hour? And sometimes you may have to adjust things in a more responsive manner. Like, for example, if one of your kids, you've got one or two or multiple?
I've got 2 boys. Yeah.
2 boys. So if one of the boys gets sick and really needs attention, that will obviously take away and probably for a while take priority over everything else. Where he said, well, yeah, I was planning to edit this podcast episode, but honestly, I better sit on the edge of his bed and just make sure that he's not melting, having the sweats or anything like that. So, how much, I mean, you did mention you presented at Osrail last year about diversity in the industry. So I'm now trying to bring that Working Mumma thing that you did a little bit more towards our industry, because the podcast, this one here, is obviously about the railway industry in the first place. Let's just start with what would you think roughly is the usage of what you're offering with Working Mumma in the rail industry? Do you have clients or subscribers, whatever you want to call it, from the railway industry, or is it largely ignored in the very industry that you're working in?
I think there are, like, I know of some subscribers. I was actually at the Rail Industry Awards last year, and someone went, like, one female went up to another female and said, "This is the person I was talking to you about. You should listen to her podcast." So I think it's there. And I think also I've been able to grow my network actually in the rail industry because of talking about diversity. Like, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a project manager, but one thing I've found that I actually can engage with people on and certainly build up my own network, particularly of females in the industry, is by talking about the diversity topics. So my topics aren't exclusive to any particular industry, but the topics are relatable to people in rail. And so, yeah, as I said, I've been able to talk at Ausrail and relate back to what we're doing to the rail industry, because we know that we do want to increase the amount of females in the industry. And so that latest ARA statistics from WGEA have actually shown that female workforce participation is increasing. There is a focus on it. And so that's where, we don't have a lot of, unfortunately, women that, go on maternity leave. It's not a huge percentage. There are so many other topics that, from a diverse, particularly female workforce perspective, that we need to probably focus on as an industry. But I think at least highlighting and supporting some of the topics that I talk about in the rail industry can play even just a small part, increasing female workforce participation.
Yeah. What I find is very notable in the rail industry is the complaint that we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough workers. And the workers that we do have follow a very concerning demographic, is that everybody's getting older. A lot of people will retire in the next few years, and then the problem gets even bigger. And I've been saying for a long time, including on this podcast here, that with an issue like this, an industry-wide issue like this, it would be complete insanity to ignore half or even more than half of the world's population, which is women. Yeah. So one very obvious thing to increase the workforce in the rail industry is to increase the share of women, where arguably there should be more free agents being available, including moms who have paused their career to create a family and then bring them back into the workforce. Let's talk about how you think your initiatives help someone concretely in the industry. So is the starting point of getting into your world actually when women are off with their first parentship, when they get the first child, and then they find they don't have all the support that they may want, and then they suddenly realize, or they hear it from a friend or so, there is you with your podcast and with your website and whatever, where they can start finding help. Is that normally the entry point in your world, in your Working Mumma world, that is?
It would be, yeah. Look, I'd probably actually also broaden this out of, actually, if we're talking about increasing female workforce participation in the rail industry, there's actually a well-known statistic that actually says gender stereotypes start even before a baby's born. So as soon as someone says, yes, I'm having a boy, instantly they'll get the trucks and the trains and the blue clothes, and the girls will get the dolls and the pink. And so, and the media messages as well that go around are, for a male, be a good employer, good leader, good sports person. Girls, it's very much about be a good friend and more mothering, sort of family orientated messages. So what we need to do is actually start changing as well and debunking some of the stories that we're also telling our children of what their gender stereotypes are. So even if I don't have a daughter, but I've actually got a niece, and certainly I know that any messages I'll be giving her is about being a strong female, standing up for herself and giving her the opportunity. Like, it was only on the weekend, we were away and she's kicking. We were like, right, so we try and kick the footy and things, just because boys and girls can play football. I'm talking about AFL football here. So it starts from a very young age. And what we're also finding, even from a Siemens perspective, is that, say, between year 7 and year 9, it's such an influential part of a person's education where they're starting to choose their subjects, because by year 10, all the electives are chosen. So we then need to also advocate and educate about what the opportunities are for not only just the rail industry, but also for engineering and even potentially project management that go in as a pathway. Typically, even career counsellors, we know to this day, are still telling women or girls, go into teaching, go into nursing, traditional female, I put in inverted commas, jobs. Career counsellors, we know, aren't saying, what about engineering as an opportunity? What about project management as an opportunity? We've done a program at Siemens where we've actually had female engineers go out to a girls' high school in Sydney, tell them about the opportunities of working in rail. They're saying, look at the great handbag I can have, look at the nice shoes, and showing them that it's not all about high vis, which it might only be high vis maybe for 10% of the time, but not 100%, particularly working as a signalling engineer. And the university degrees aren't giving enough exposure as well into what's in the rail industry, because they're all the engineering disciplines are all competing in. It's starting to slowly change from an engineering skill set, but it's still going to take a while. So we need to educate those women. So there's different stages. So we've got the education piece once they're in university, trying to get them there. And then once we then get them, once they're families and things, yes, it is about, often it's more about that family flexibility. And one thing I have heard for the rail industry is that commissionings on a weekend at 3 a.m. in the morning aren't probably the most family-friendly time, for women. But it's unfortunately one of the realities that we have as an industry. We can't shut down the rail network on a Monday morning at 9 a.m., at 7 a.m., because that's the peak period of everyone going to work. Yeah. So it's one of those realities, but it's also about creating those flexible arrangements. And that's often what women are looking for. So that's a very long answer, I know, but it's in terms of female workforce participation, it's so many different factors, and I think it across different stages of people's lives, that it's not just about the women returning back into work, but even getting them well before that to actually say, look, this is the opportunity. Because you're right, we've got this workforce shortage of the next 10 years of about 70,000 people that we know that are going to retire. And so we need to then think about how we're going to attract people into the industry, and we really need to be starting with those, students that are in high school today.
Yeah, I think you made a very important point, is that there are a number of opportunities where the industry could make an advertising for themselves to attract young people, girls as much as boys, to the railway industry. And so you had an example which is very, very early, but very formative, when basically younger students at school have to choose between their subject matters that they want to intensify their studies on. And that's a very early point in time where somebody may decide to go towards engineering or STEM professions, or go the other way and do something else. And then there's obviously another touch point during high school. There's another touch point during university. And there's also another touch point where you can try to attract people from other disciplines. And especially in strategy, which is the area you're working in, one of the most brilliant minds in railway strategy that I ever met back in Europe was, I think, a biologist or so by trade, that has just moved into the railway industry, and by just using a sharp mind and common sense, and the ability to look at things, analyze them, connect the dots, and then draw conclusions. He was absolutely brilliant in strategy. And even though he was not a railway person by education, by any means, I enjoyed very much talking to him really in depth, because he just understood the essence. So there are many points to attract people into the industry, but those points need to be identified and then they need to be serviced. Yeah. And I welcome it very much every time I see a company, not just Siemens, any company going into schools, playing around with a model railway, maybe organizing some site surveys, or maybe even showing off the nice things in life like handbags and stuff. And look, I got all of this from working in the railways. Yeah, whatever is basically out there to make the industry more attractive, it's welcome. And I think more members of the industry should do it more often.
Yeah, definitely. We've got to advocate for the industry. It's a competitive market. We're not only competing against companies for talent, but we're also competing against other industries as well. So we need to do that. And look, there is the Work in Rail campaign from the ARA, and I know different companies are doing their part as well. So it's good to see.
What I think is another important touch point is that when women enter the industry, to basically debunk the myth that any form of career will be over the very moment you say, I want to have a family. Because then there may still be some dinosaur managers or employers basically writing them off for, couple of years, and she will be gone anyway, and she will be gone for good. I think if we could get a mindset shift there, that women will very likely come back into the industry after their parenting break. B, they haven't lost their mind. They are still as sharp after the birth of a child as they were beforehand. And C, they still have the aspiration to grow their careers and develop their careers, and not just saying, well, whenever something with my child, I drop everything and then I go home and I disappear. And even if that was the case, there should be flexible enough work arrangements to enable this. You say, well, yeah, that's fine. I understand if your child is sick, you need to go home. But while you're home, you can still do some work. And then at times where your child is healthy and well looked after, because, I don't know, your husband is on holidays or so, maybe you can put a little bit more work in, and just keeping it balanced.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those flexible arrangements. And also that's one thing that I've actually stood up at a couple of infrastructure and also rail conferences and said to men in the room, and actually got them to reflect on what are they doing to support the women in their team? What are they doing to support their wives, for example? Because the mental load needs to be shared. And we know that really gender diversity and gender equality really starts at home. So the more that we can actually share at home, the man has or the father has caring arrangements, they're able to help out at home, and as I said, carry some of that mental load, because that is often one of the biggest hurdles for women to overcome. And also that's one of the reasons that women sometimes will actually cut back from work, because they're like, oh look, it's just too exhausting, I'm doing too much, I'm burnt out. And it's usually not necessarily burnt out from a work perspective. It's usually burnt out from a home perspective. So the more that we can actually share that, and we've actually then, and I've had men, and I raised this at the Victorian Infrastructure Conference last year on a panel, and it was probably 90% men in the room. So that's why I actually changed some of my language of, well, what are you doing? We all need to be a part of this conversation. If you ask the women in the room, they all know what needs to happen. Really, from a rail industry perspective, we need to be talking to the other 76% of the industry and how they can actually support women in their organisations and in their teams, or even their wives. So that's where, by having flexible work arrangements, encouraging men to take parental leave. So there's more and more companies that are offering, gender neutral pay leave, which is great to see. So more fathers can do it, and they can also then, leave and have those flexible work arrangements. So it's also about what can men do to support the females in the workplace. And so it's not just always, oh, look, it's just the mother and things like that, but also then enabling it, as you said earlier on, debunking some of those myths and just probably some of those stereotypes. Like, at Siemens, we have a, Raphael, she's a female CEO. We've got Alex, who's a male CFO, but they work both flexibly. They will work from home and different hours and the like. So I know that both of them have actually blocked out time in their diaries for dinner. They're like, right, we want to eat dinner together as a family. And I have to say that it's great to see that. And it's great to have that kind of support as a leadership of going, right, okay, they really value their family time, and they've both got, kids of various ages. So it's also the leaders sharing that, but also having, I think, really male allies. So like for example, at International Women's Day this year, we decided not to do a real just focused event at Siemens. What we did instead was did it over a month. We also ran a panel around allyship for females in the organisation. We had also males on that panel about how they can support females within the team to also elevate them up, and what we can all do as an organisation, which was really well received. So, as I said, it's not just a female topic. It's both genders as well.
Yeah. Maybe a word on flexible work arrangements. I think that's applicable even more so since COVID for a number of minority groups or a number of working groups. So I just had a chat recently for another podcast episode with a retiree. And I basically asked him the question, what would be required for the industry to seduce you back into the workforce? And the key component there really was a flexible work arrangement where you can work part-time, you can work partly from home, or maybe even predominantly from home, and you're not given the hard grinding task with the all-night telephone conferences with overseas, but you're given stuff that's just more fun, or which makes it easier to say yes to, and I think the employers that embrace those workplace flexibility a bit more, not just as a lip service, but with real action, with real initiative, they will win big time over time. Like I look at it from my own perspective, working as a consultant. I mean, since COVID, I have hardly done any travel interstate, because to be honest, it's not my favorite pastime to sit at airports, to sit on airplanes, to live in hotel rooms instead of being at home in my own bed, talking to my wife over a dinner table, something like that. So these days, if somebody says, yeah, we want you to work as a consultant, but you have to be in an office on the other side of the country 5 days a week for 8 hours, I will say thank you, but no thank you. So if somebody over East really wanted to have my brains on a project, they would have to come up with some kind of a flexible arrangement that makes it easy for me to say yes to. And that doesn't necessarily mean accommodating all my very outlandish requests or so. It just means creating a work environment that opens up the scope of potential workers and supporters, not just in the tiny microcosmos requiring a move over East and stuff like that, but also enabling people from other parts of the country, or maybe even from overseas, to contribute mentally or via Zoom conferences like we do to a project. So my next question, therefore, is not just related to women. I think it's related generally to everybody in the industry who wants to balance career and family life. If I ask you to give me 3 top recommendations from your own practice in Working Mumma, how to create this kind of balance, how to have a challenging career while still having a fulfilling family life, what would you say?
Number one, it's about knowing what you want. You can't ask for something if you don't know what exactly it is that you're asking for. And so that for me, and it's also, you've got to work that out with what also is going to work for you and your family. Like, for example, what works for me and my family is probably, and it is different for different friends of mine. I find 4 days a week works really well. But I then have a level of flexibility. If there's something urgent on, say, a day that I don't officially work, that I will do that. So, but I've also got sort of probably that psychological agreement with myself that I will have that. So it's about, as I said, knowing about what you want, then also then asking for it to having those conversations with your employer, understanding what their policies are, but also understanding how it can be win-win for both you and also the employer, because the employer is going to be like, well, I'm not going to give you all of this and I'm not going to get anything in return. So it's got to be for benefits of both parts. Like, for example, when I was returning back from my second maternity leave, I had the conversation. They're like, look, we'll have you back for anything that any days. And they always knew that I wanted to increase over time. So it's one of those things that it's been win-win. They've also seen that I've had the outputs, I've proved myself. And people have said to me, would you go to 5 days? I thought, I've probably got the same outputs just because I've been around the organisation for so long. I can still do what I do in 5. I'd probably do it in 4 anyway, and I do it just as well. So that's my second tip, is really making sure that you understand what you want, but you're also aligning that with the organisation. And then also number 3, it's about the communication, not only communicating like within your own personal circles, but also then within your network, because you can find that those boundaries can get blurred a bit. So like I, for example, have the footer of my email will say I work Tuesday to Friday. I will also, when I remember, put on my out of office. So there's an expectation that I'll reply. And then sometimes on my day off, I do check my email. And look, this is a personal choice. I will check my email just to keep on top of it. If there's anything urgent that's come up, I'll do that maybe at lunchtime and maybe one other time during the afternoon. So at least I've cried, because I hate going into a Tuesday with just not knowing what's happening. So I will keep an eye on my emails. And if something's urgent, I will respond. So for me, it's a bit of debits and credits in that sense. I might, I'll do it maybe an hour here, but then I know that from a flexibility perspective, I will leave the office to be able to go. I have about an hour commute to get home. When I'm in the office, I need to leave at 4:30. I'll still be on calls and things like that on the way home. But yeah, so just in summary, it's about knowing what you want and what's going to work for you, having that conversation to make sure it's win-win. And then number 3, finding those boundaries, and then also the communication as well.
With the last thing that you said, I could imagine that might cause problems if you take your own boundaries too loosely. Because if people realize, once people realize you respond to emails on your day off, by doing so, you create an expectation with others that you will do this more often. Yeah. So I mean, and maybe you can talk a little bit more to that. How do you give yourself that flexibility without losing those boundaries, without suddenly people expecting from you to be online in the email basically 24/7, even though officially you've got a day off?
That's where the out of office works really well. So I just won't, some emails I won't respond, or if I know that particularly there's a really busy period, I know there's something might be happening, I'll do it. But yeah, then there's some elements that I'm like, look, I think it was last Monday, I barely checked my email because I was like, I'm too busy with kids. It was school holidays and the like in Melbourne. So it's one of those things, as I said, it's a bit of debits and credits. And it's also about being quite good with those boundaries. My boundaries probably about 2 years ago were pretty bad. And so that's when I've really had to go, no, what's important. As a result, I actually increased my days from 3 to 4. I had this one day that it was just, it's all, you have those moments that just break it. And I had a moment one day, I was trying to do a work call. It's my day off. I had 2 kids at my feet. It just wasn't working for anyone. And that's when I realized, no, I might as well get paid. I'm working 4 days anyway, pretty much. So I might as well get paid for it. So Mondays, I actually spend most of my days actually with kids and busy, and so I'm mostly distracted. There might just be a little lunchtime that I'll do it. But so that's where I'll go through the emails. What's important, what's not important. If there's something that's really urgent, like I had something this week that was really urgent that needed to get out for employees. So I just quickly logged on, did it, and then away I went. But yeah, so for me, it's a bit, but I also know that, yeah, it's a bit of the debits and credits. But yeah, it's one thing you do have to be caught when you're working flexibly. You do have to be quite mindful of the hours that you're doing, and also making sure you're still having that balance for yourself.
Yeah. I think like most things in life, boundaries require maintenance as well, right?
They do. And it's every day. It's a constant evaluation of, look, what's important. It's just like what your priorities of that. You think, even today, I was like, right, I'm going to do this, this, and this. No, an email comes in overnight. All right, I've got to do this. So you're constantly reprioritizing. And it's just like with boundaries as well. And it's just every day you've got a different priority with work. And with my role, there are some things that can't wait another day. And so like, right, I'll do it today. And then tomorrow it's not going to be so bad.
Yeah. For the last few minutes of our conversation, I would like to change direction almost entirely and actually talk a little bit about the stuff that you do at work every day. You are head of strategy at Siemens for the rail space, for the transportation space. Obviously, nobody, including me, can expect you to disclose all the crown jewels, how Siemens plans their strategy for the next 5 years or something like that. But I think as the basis of your strategy, you will have to look at trends in the marketplace. What's happening there, having some or creating some idea and understanding how the market will probably develop over the next few years, and then deriving a strategy from that. So I basically would like to go into those first two things, like looking at the marketplace and estimating or assessing where the market will go. So we leave the strategy part, the conclusions aside. Unless you want to share them with everybody, I don't think you will. But how do you see the railway industry in Australia doing at the moment, and what trends you can see that will be relevant for everybody, not just for your company?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually only just reading a report this morning from BITRE. It's a government report looking at the investment of rail over the last couple of years in Australia. And interestingly, last year it was a record amount of government investment in the rail industry currently. So as we all know, that, it is record investment. There's, big build projects happening across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, and then New Zealand's obviously got a change of governments there, and it's no secret that they are more road focused than they are rail. So it's definitely that time, but we do know that cliff is coming, that where the infrastructure investment is going to, I guess, normalise. And look, at the moment with the record investment, we know that it's no secret that there's the war for talent, there's the war for materials and costs and expertise. So that's certainly out there. So I'd say that the investment's happening. We know that at a government level, interoperability is a really big topic. We know it's on the Transport Minister's agenda. The NTC are doing some great work to certainly drive that forward. And they've said in forums that this year, 2024, is the year to make that happen, because they know that next year is going into an election year, and who knows. So I think the whole industry are waiting with bated breath to get some agreement, and hopefully the agreement comes between the state transport ministers and also Minister King from a federal perspective to actually have an interoperability, way forward. Because you try and explain the rail industry to Australia for people coming in from international, and you say there's like different gauges and there's all different systems, and they just look at you going, are we Australia or are we just like 8 different countries? So some interoperability would be amazing. As well, what we've already spoken about, the war for talent, there's, the retirement cliff that's coming as well. And so that's certainly going to be something that's really big. But also I see decarbonisation, after you've got the mining industry, you've got the transport industry is the second biggest emitter of CO2. So that's where the pressure is going to come on to the the transport space. Yes, rail is a relatively small part of that, but also rail can play a huge role in playing a part to actually to decrease our emissions. And I heard something recently from a stat from the ARA with the freight report that they've done. I think it's something crazy like only 2% of freight between Melbourne and Sydney is actually on rail. The stat blew my mind that I'm like, this is crazy. How can we have so many, B double trucks going up and down the Hume Highway? Why can't they be put on rail and just change the transport? So obviously there's a lot of systems, structures and jobs that are at stake as we move towards a more of a sustainable future. But I think there's a way to do it. So there's a lot that's there, and certainly the way that we're looking at the market, it's what we need to be market led. Yep, we can have the greatest technology, but unless the market there's ready, it's pointless. So that's where we're seeing, what are the trends coming from international, but also really where is the Australian marketplace today to really help take the market forward.
Well, with regards to interoperability, which is obviously very much front of mind, specifically in my niche, which is railway signaling, modern digital signaling, that is, I keep reminding people that Australia, well, nominally is a country, yes, but it's also a continent. So with regards to the differences between the different states and the different signaling systems that have evolved in those states over time, historically, over a long, long period of time of more than 100 years, Australia is probably more comparable to a multi-nation continent like Europe when it comes to things like signaling systems, and interoperability should not be seen as a given or as a small task. It's really a huge thing, and maybe for the first time ever now, those modern technologies might give us a fair shot for interoperability. Whereas in the past, if somebody said, well, we want the signaling system in Victoria look like the signaling system in New South Wales, you would have rather created a civil war than getting this done, right?
100%, yeah.
But I think approaching this interoperability in a similar way as it is approached in Europe, and then looking at where are we at the moment? What are the realities that we have already created? So I'm thinking, for example, the rollout of ETCS level 2 in Sydney and in Brisbane. So nominally same technology in both places, the same version of the ETCS standards in both places. So you would think it should be a no-brainer that those two systems must be interoperable. And reality will probably show they're not, because the one system has been developed with the Sydney signaling principles in mind. The other system has been developed with the Brisbane signaling principles in mind, and both signaling principles tend to be different. So
and
why
they'll be customized? So
yeah, exactly. So why would the new system be interoperable just because it's ETCS, which I think is one of the biggest misconceptions regarding that technology, that people think just by applying the 4 letters ETCNS, things will be interoperable by nature. So where I'm still a bit skeptical, and I think where NTC, National Transport Commission, has a major task to address, to tackle, is the commercial realities of creating interoperability in a situation where we may already have diverging solutions. So if I stay with the example between Sydney and Brisbane and say we find out there's a gap in between that currently prevents interoperability, who's going to close that gap and who's going to pay for closing that gap?
Pay for it.
Right? So if somebody came to the transport minister in Queensland saying, we need another $50 million for our ETCS project on Cross River Rail for the purpose of creating interoperability with the system in Sydney, and by the way, there may be a slight risk for the commissioning date of the Cross River Rail Tunnel as well because of that, what do you think he's going to say? and he can be in those transport minister meetings as long as he likes. There will be economic realities where he said, well, wait a minute, is interoperability really that important? So I see this as a major potential obstacle. I don't want to paint a picture too black, but I think that's a major challenge. And I could imagine that over time, people will realize that the idealistic views of interoperability may be overshadowed by those economic realities. How do you see that?
I know the economic element is, I know, yeah, well, from what I've heard from the NTC, that economic question is actually part of the discussion with the transport minister. So it's not something that they're trying to gloss over and say, like, right, we want interoperability. They're going, we want interoperability, and what does that look like, even down to who's going to pay? Because there's always a cost element, as what you've alluded to. And I know that Caroline Walsh, who's the chair of the NTC, has that as one of the key topics and key considerations of, yes, interoperability, and this is the cost, and this what it might look like. So I do have confidence in that the NTC have that on the table. They know that is a key discussion point, and then hopefully they can work through it. Who knows? But they do also know that there is a lot of work to be done in the next 8 months to hopefully get this, at least some standardization through. And hopefully there is a cost share arrangement in some regard. And because, you know, we've got the ARTC and what they're going to do and things like that. So there's a number of different elements. I know we can go off into all different tangents, but there's a lot of unknowns still. So look, I'm hopefully even as a baseline, and the NTC aren't trying to solve all interoperability issues. It's good that they have just focused on a couple, and then hopefully they can then build on that going forward. So yeah, fingers crossed to them and good luck. So that's all I can say. But I do know that they seem to have the right momentum and the right support, which is good.
Crossing fingers should always be a part of any strategy, but it shouldn't be the only part.
Definitely not. No, they are consulting a lot. So the messages they're giving out is positive.
Okay. Well, then we end this on a high note. Carina, thank you very much for your time. I hope that listeners found it interesting, not just from a career and family balance perspective, but with the last bit that we did also from a general interest in the rail industry perspective. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for the opportunity. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The interoperability of digital signaling systems is not just an issue here in Australia, but also in other countries that have several railway systems interoperating with each other. Therefore, I have created the best and probably only training in the world on the topic of digital signaling interoperability. It includes my trademark SPA framework. If you want to know what that means, just have a listen to the training. I talk about digital signaling in Australia, which is transferable to other countries as well. I introduce the main technologies CBTC, ETCS, and also ATMS, which is a special bespoke Australian development. I talk about the hierarchy of interoperability controls, which is extremely helpful in investigating what can be done regarding interoperability. I talk about interoperability between different CBTC systems, interoperability between ETCS, which is not as easy as it may seem, and also interoperability between different signaling technologies. Podcast listeners are currently getting a special 10% discount if they sign up before the 30th of June 2024. And the link to sign up is docfranktraining.podia.com/interoperability. I say it again, it's docfranktraining.podia.com/interoperability. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry. And I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.